Remnants of the Forgotten Past by Alban 55, Chapter 16. Mistral. I'm not getting out of here. And there it was again, the same strange dream that Han had mentioned. They had been happening predictably throughout the week. He had been traveling with Neptune and Arslan. They weren't recurring, but there were similarities every time. Namely, they were like little snippets of someone else's memory, and never long enough for him to really figure out what they were about. This latest one was just a feeling of despair as he lied on the ground in an evergreen forest in a locale that he didn't recognize. The person whose eyes he was looking through, was it himself? It didn't seem like it, but he felt a connection with their suffering. At least they bothered him, but they were never along or lucid enough to leave a lasting impact into the waking world beyond more contemplation. Every time he had one, he would sit up in his sleeping bag and ponder it for a few minutes, but he never got any answers. It was getting to the point where he felt he shouldn't dwell on it at all. No amount of thinking was going to get him closer to what it meant. But the fact that another jinchuriki in Han knew he would start having these was bothering him above all else. He could try and track the go-by down and get some answers, but things weren't about to get a lot more hectic anyway. He didn't have the time to dwell on those things, since it was yesterday he had first laid eyes on the gates of the Kingdom of Mistral. The place was amazing even before he and his companions even stepped foot in the city. It was built into a mountain, which honestly was to be expected since they had been traversing mountain terrains for the past week or so. For the past few days, they had witnessed numerous airships flying overhead. Naruto balked the first time he saw one, just staring dumbly at the sky with his mouth open. They were all converging on the same place, and when the three travelers got there, they were ushered in with some other refugees and travelers by Wall Patrol. Apparently, the Kingdom of Mistral had a pretty loose policy on refugees, so after not much fuss, they were turned loose into the walls. With the insides of the kingdom's capital, he was reminded so much of home, just in the style of architecture and dress of the people. Well, in some ways at least, it was surprising. The clothes everyone seemed to wear was often only formal garb back home, and definitely not something a shinobi would wear, and the architecture wasn't really used in military village like Konoha, but rather in other cities throughout Hinokuni. Besides him, he could see there was a spark of familiarity and wariness in Neptune's eyes about having to return to the place of his birth. But Arslan was genuinely starstruck by the size and sights of the capital city after growing up in the muddy little village. Naruto was concerned about his two new friends, but for the last few days, it was mostly about Neptune. Neptune had been quiet ever since they had witnessed the first airship flying overhead, and had gotten quieter still when they set eyes on the city for the first time. Once they got through the gates, he started rubbing his left hand for a reason Naruto didn't know. Ever so often, he would take a glance at one of the stalls or businesses he had set up in the area before retreating into himself and going back to what he was doing. He was trying not to be seen, not to let it be. He was just happy to get out of the wild and the multiple grim attacks that happened every day. He could tell Arslan was as well, even beyond all she had been through lately. He could tell that she had never been under so much stress just from the grim attacks alone. They were all just so exhausted. Neptune and Arslan in particular, they had never seen so many grim in their life. It would explain why they were so subdued and put out, but Neptune's attitude seemed to get worse the closer they got to Mr. Arslan couldn't believe he preferred to stay out there and content with grim. Neptune! Naruto called at the day's Neptune. Neptune! He yelled louder, snapping the blue-haired boy from his little world. Naruto looked at him and shook his head before putting on a smile. Come on, guys, he said to ease the mood. We need to get to the upper quarter where all the nobles live. Lady Fall gave me her address to her manor, and you too have to show her your stuff. Neptune looked at him with relief and thrill about being able to get out of the lower quarters. The nobles all lived in their own quarters up above in their manors that had been built in the mountains. The near dwellers in the lower quarters didn't typically wander into the upper quarters. There were too many consequences if one did wrong to a member of the nobility. It was a short airship ride later until they were in the upper quarters and away from the plebeians of the kingdom and the general crime that lurked in the lower levels of Mistral. Like any kingdom, the nobles' quarters were going to be a lot nicer than anywhere else. Naruto had seen the manners of on the mountain from a distance away, but getting in close told him how extravagant that they truly were. Haven Academy was up there too. The academy grounds in a separate location from the manors and taking up a lot of the available space in each narrow mountain peak. As they walked along the impeccable clean streets of the quarter, the people they saw were dressed in clothes more befitting the nobility. It was even comparable to Naruto's home. He swore he saw formal kimonos and the like from the do-well rich folk walking around. He was trying to take in all the sights of the kingdom as he could, his blue eyes sparkling with childish curiosity in both the lower and upper quarters. For the lower quarters, it was the amount of people. For the upper quarters, it was the extravagance and perfection the quarter seemed to bring. Meanwhile, Neptune was just keeping his eyes trained to the ground and ducking as if he were trying to avoid being seen again, albeit for entirely different reasons. And Arslan seemed lost in thought. Both were still profoundly quiet. "This is it," Naruto said as he stood in front of a manor that reminded him of something that the daimyo would live in. 496, he said, reading the address of big golden characters. There were no guards on site like Naruto imagined the manor might have, and the gate was unlocked as the three kids strolled right along the dirt path up to the front door. And tall, perfect hedges blocked their view of what was no doubt a large garden on the other side. They made their way up the steps, Arslan looking memorized by the golden lion effigies flanking the top of the staircase. Naruto grabbed the knocker on the door. After a subpar height just barely allowed him to reach it, and knocked forcefully 3 times. The door reverted with heavy thudding ground pounds, loud enough to be heard in this giant manor. They stood there in silence for about 30 seconds until the heavy front double doors were opened with effort from someone on the inside. On the other side, there was a man in his 40s in suit and tie, clearly a butler or servant. "And you children are?" he asked curtly, but not impolitely. He didn't seem unaccustomed to seeing children knocking on the front door of the manor. He almost seemed to know who they were already. "Where?" Neptune spoke this time. "We're applicants for Sanctum Academy. We wish to speak to the lady." The man merely blinked. "But of course. Do you have an appointment?" "Well, not exactly. We were traveling to to outside the borders and had no idea how long it would take to get here. We came here with getting an appointment on one of our goals in mind. My friend here talked to the lady over the scroll, and she said that we were welcome to take the test, whatever that could be." "I see. So you wish to set an appointment? Usually that is done through the lady's work scroll, but I will give her a ring. Please come in and take a seat in the living room. Lady Fall will be with you shortly." The butler opened the door wider before stepping off to the side and bowing to them. Naruto walked in first with Neptune behind him and Arslan taking up the rear. He looked around in amazement. If the outside looked similar to home, then the inside was about as foreign as it could to his native land. The butler pointed them to the living room, and Naruto wasn't able to get an entirely good look at the decor on the wall in the foyer, but as they walked down the hallway, he took note of the suits of armor, as well as the paintings and tapestries lining the wall. The living room was cozy, with more paintings and decorations lining the walls. The light was dim, with only a roaring fireplace in the center of the room, and a series of plush armchairs and sofas littering the room. "Please, take a seat, and please do not touch any of the lady's possessions," the butler said. "I will return with Lady Fall momentarily." The butler let them alone in the room as Arslan and Neptune took a seat on the sofa. Naruto remained standing, walking around the room and looking at the various odds and ends of the decorations with a wide, curious smile. "Well, we're fine here," Arslan said, relief coating her voice, even as the tension remained. She stared right at Naruto when she said that. Neptune was too busy trying to make himself appear as small as possible. "Yeah," Naruto turned around, pausing to stare at Arslan. "What you thinking right now? You finally happen to be within the walls and away from all the grim." Arslan smiled a peculiar smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "In a way." "Sorry about this, Professor." It was in the fire pit in her own backyard where Professor Alice Liddell's body burned away into nothing from a powerful katanjutsu after her life functions had faded. There was no sign of a struggle beyond a small pool of blood on the professor's kitchen floor. It was a hit to the back of the subclavian artery with the kunai. It was as quiet a kill as possible. Made possible by the fuinjutsu wrapped around a kunai, it increased its skill in power and get through that Petsky aura. To the neighbors, it just looked like she was having herself a fire in her backyard, and they wouldn't have noticed the tall, slender blonde woman pocket her wallet, her house keys, and anything else on the now deceased woman that would infer her identity. Ni Yukito pulled up a chair and watched the fire burn away, and with it all the remnants of the true Professor Liddell, deputy headmistress of Haven Academy, one of Leo Lionheart's closest confidants, and the one she had been targeting to replace all this time. She put her hands into a seal, and upon the puff of smoke that was released, there was an altogether new woman where the jinchuriki had just been sitting. Amazing that the basic hinge could do in a world that wasn't aware of its existence. A silent kill, and the killer takes her place. Basic and easy, even if the target was one of the most powerful warriors in the kingdom and in a lofty position of power. Yujito filled with a strand of her new hair. It was blonde just like her old one. For starters, the woman seemed to be around the same age as her own 27 years, and a look into her wallet at the birthday on her ID indicated she was only a year off of that assessment, and being the second most powerful huntress at the kingdom's prestigious academy at the age of 28. Well, there were plenty of prodigies in the ninja world themselves. Yujito was a platinum blonde. This new hair was more golden and hung down to her shoulders instead of in the neat ponytail that Yujito kept hers in. She wore civilian clothes, obviously suited for just being at home. Pictures in her living room seemed to show her in her work attire, a sky blue set of armored and combat boots. Her weapon was apparently the scimitar that was strapped to her back in the photo. She looked around her new kitchen, thinking to herself about how this was going to be her new home for a while after taking the other woman's identity. It was clearly upper scale given the lofty professional salary, but Liddell clearly lived alone, just like Yujito. The woman's scroll was sitting on the countertop, not touched during the entire affair. She fiddled with the device until the blue light shone in the darkness and the scroll became active. A treasure trove of information was right at her fingertips, but what she was looking for would not be in a text message or the recordings of a scroll call. She opened up the contact list and began scrolling through picture after picture. She passed a photo of what appeared to be a middle-aged noblewoman, read some names that were fellow faculty at Haven Academy before she got to the one she wanted, the headmaster himself. The new school semester started in under a month, to which she would go there and resume work with her colleagues. It would be strange to pop in and talk to her new boss right now, especially with questions about what happens in the secret brotherhood she was now a direct part of. She carried the scroll over to the living room, admiring the arrangement that Liddell had set up within her own home. She grinned at the comfortable-looking recliner before crashing onto it and kicking her feet back. She wiggled her transformed toes and continued looking through the scroll before shutting it off. She could get used to this, but she couldn't afford to sit around and disappear completely. This was just the first time in this first step in a really long process in which getting close to Haven's headmaster was only the first leg of a marathon. Tremaine Fall was a bit of an enigma amongst the Mystrilian nobility. A woman in her early 50s, Lady Fall has always been taken by Vale and Atlas culture over her native Mystrilian. Although the architecture of her home resembled a typical Mystrilian manor, the interior was decorated with something more out of Atlas. She sat in her office, looking over her new applicants for the upcoming school year. She stole glances every once in a while at the person seated in the plush chair right in front of her desk. Do I make myself clear, Cinder? She asked, putting down her paper and leveling a firm glare at her daughter. Cinderfall looked ahead at her mother with a glazed look and a serene smile on her face. Of course, mother. Her voice light, but underneath it all the smarminess that only her mother could pick up on. It was a sign that she wasn't listening to her. Tremaine sighed. I don't understand why you feel the need to do this. You are 1 year away from graduating at Haven. You got top marks in your class, a pair of parents that love you, numerous suitors, and the best group of friends that one could hope for. You've known Henry since you two were 5. Why would you leave the poor boy on like that? Oh, it's not Henry's fault. He was a good friend, but that's all he should have been, a friend. He just didn't understand what I wanted from a relationship, so I had to let him go. Tremaine folded her arms on her desk and leveled another stern glare at Cinder, raising her head been an experience, and even as a young adult she had still not grown up in many ways. She was still something from I am a Mystrilian snob regarding the stereotypical nobility of their kingdom, but beyond that, the Tremaine was worried about the little devious glint in her eye. Had she spoiled her too much? She tried to be as caring as a mother could be to her own offspring. She had had seen the way some of her fellow nobles, even friends, brought up their children. They were either spoiled rotten or led by domineering authoritarian parents. That upbringing and how it perpetuated led to the sordid reputation of the Mysterious nobility over the years. But she was always having none of it. Her husband, bless his heart, tended to delve into spoiling his only daughter, but there was always something else afoot here with Cinder. At the age of 15, in the midst of her sanctum years, Cinderfall was diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder. No amount of good parenting would do anything about that, but Tremaine had tried her best regardless in the attempt that it would help. Cinder, this needs to stop. Everyone around you, you treat like dirt and expect the world back from your friends, your on and off boyfriend, your peers, or teachers, even your father. When are you going to grow up? When the world decides to grow up as well? And what is that supposed to mean? Tremaine asked. Cinder gave her a coy smile. Nothing, mother, she said sickeningly. There came a knock at the office door, and Tremaine gave a small sigh before putting on the best smile and happiest tone she could. Come in, she sang. One of the manor servants cracked open the door and poked his head in nervously, flinching when his eyes fell on the two women in the room. Cinder frowned while Tremaine smiled warmly and gestured him to continue. Lady Fall, you have guests waiting in the foyer. One of them said something about combat school business. He says that you gave him the address to the manor and would sponsor them if they could pass your aptitude test. Oh, of course, of course. Thank you, dear, she said warmly, yet briskly rising to her seat. Her gaze became colder as it lingered on her daughter. We'll discuss this again later, Cinder, she said. I have to take this. She exited the hallway, and the first thing she noticed when she stepped into the living room and saw the three kids sitting there was how out of place and uncomfortable they looked just being there. Clearly, none of them were from wealthy backgrounds. Tremaine gave them a polite smile, trying to ease the nerves of the children as she went and sat down in her posh armchair. She smiled lightly at a nearby servant, who knew all he needed to by the gleam in her eyes. Hurriedly, he rushed on down the hall. Hello. I'm sorry, you must forgive me. As a wealthy patron of Mr. Academy, both combat and non-combat, I schedule appointments with many prospective students looking to enroll in Sanctum. Who are you three? My name is Neptune Vasilis, the blue-haired boy said from his seat on the sofa, bowing politely to the noblewoman. Arslan Atlan, Naruto mumbled. And I'm Naruto, the last of the bunch introduced eagerly, pointing a thumb backwards at himself comfortedly. The Mr. Noblewoman thumbed her fingers against the fabric of her chair. I don't believe I heard that name before. Are you sure we have spoken? And she asked politely. Naruto's grin faltered. She seemed nice, but he wasn't sure if any of them could trust this woman yet. She was a sponsor of the Clover Troop after all, but was she aware of all the shady dealings of Van Claver, or did she think she was just funding the wholesome circus act? We're employees from the Clover Troop, he said, catching Neptune and Arslan's eyes. There was a flash of understanding. They were all aware of the alibi they were going to use. They couldn't let Tremaine know that Claver was compromised and his circus destroyed by them yet. Well, when Naruto responded, Tremaine's eyes lit up with understanding. Oh, of course. You're the boy I talked to over the scroll call one day. The three orphan deers who found themselves working for Otto in the circus. I see you made it to Mistra after all. Naruto smiled in relief, as did the other two. So, Tremaine crossed her arms. Let's get down to business. The three of you wish to attend Sanctum and eventually Haven, is that correct? She asked, peering down from her spectacles. Not me, just these two. Tremaine raised an eyebrow and gave Naruto a suspicious once-over. Oh, that's right. I do believe I remember you mentioning that over the scroll. Normally I take kids upon appointments, but as a patron of the schools, I consider this like a job. No time like the present. You two, she said, addressing Neptune and Arslan, who were seated on either side of Naruto. Are you ready to take my aptitude test? Naruto frowned as he found himself seated in a waiting chair outside the door to the Fall family's dojo. Neptune and Arslan had already gone inside, and with him being the only one not seeking application, left him with nothing to do while they were being tested. Naruto twiddled his thumbs and crossed his feet. He hadn't had to sit still like this since the academy. He was trying to find some way to amuse himself and opted to stare at the opulent decorations lining the hallways, but with every lull in his attention span sucked him back into the boredom, and the boredom caused his mind to wander places, thinking about the home. It had taken several weeks to get from Katsuhiko to within the kingdom's walls. A feeling of unease settled in his gut, thinking about the effects his disappearance would have on Konoha, even every thought was more worrying than the last. One daydream involved him being labeled a Nukenin and hunted down, while another was just a montage of the worried faces of his friends. He looked up when something echoed throughout the large hallway. It sounded like high heels clinking against the wooden walls. Naruto turned as the sound was getting closer, looking up to see who was coming near. Naruto was drawn to the way she seemed to sashay her way down the hallway. Naruto felt heat rise into his feet as he gave the woman heading his way a once-over. Her hair hung short, but still remarkably feminine and shiny. She was garbed in a red V-neck dress that hung off her shoulders, with gold design running down the sleeves. Her long, creamy legs left bare by her outfit and carried her down the hallway, and the clinking was made by her high heels. A coy smirk was set on her face as her amber eyes danced as they turned their gazes on him. Naruto tried to make the blush on his face recede, but as the beautiful young woman got close to his mind and body seemed to betray him. "Good afternoon," she said in a deep, svelte voice that made a tingle run down Naruto's spine. He seemingly turned to mush in his seat, slumping down as he tried to babble something out in his incoherence. "Hi," Naruto coughed out. "What's your name?" she asked, the adolescent speaking to him like the younger boy he was. "Naruto." Cinder's amber eyes sparkled with recognition. "Naruto, what an interesting name," she said, mulling the name over her tongue. "Aren't you just adorable?" she cooed, making Naruto slump down in his seat more as his face turned completely beet red. "Are you here because you are an applicant to Sanctum Academy?" Naruto shook his head vigorously, not even making eye contact with Cinder. "Friends are in there. I won't go back to school." "Oh, it's such a shame." Cinder paused. "Cinder Fall, pleasure to meet you. Lady Tremaine Fall is my mother. I'm here to assist in her aptitude test and see if your friends are ready to attend Sanctum. I believe my mother is in there right now talking to your friends. If you're feeling up to it, you should talk to my mother after their test have concluded. If you don't want to go back to school but still wish to take up a combat-oriented career." Cinder's eyes trailed to the weapons pouch Naruto had on him. "Then she may be able to assist you anyway." Naruto looked at her oddly. "It was nice meeting you, Naruto. I hope we may chat again very soon. But if you'll please excuse me." She gave a noble curtsy that somehow seemed fox because entering the dojo. Naruto just stared ahead. End of chapter 16.